Welcome to the O Brother Podcast. I'm your host, Dan Smith. Alongside me, as always, my brother from the same mother, Mike Smith.
It's Halloweenfest.
Halloweenfest 2024. We're back. Mike, we're going back to take a trip back to the 80s,
Yeah.
1986 to be specific. This was your recommendation for Halloween Fest. Not that I'm putting that out as a disclaimer. However,
Right.
so tonight, let's just say we're talking about Manhunter, which I'm just going to say at the top, not a horror film. Just like last year, I think it was last year's Halloween Fest when we did a review on Jaws, and that whole episode is really just about answering the question: is that a horror film or not? We both landed on the same answer, which is no, it's not. It's a psychological thriller. It's not a horror movie, at least not by my definition. Neither is Manhunter. I think this fits in the same category as Jaws.
Yeah, I would call it a psychological thriller, although the universe of Hannibal Lecter, I think that's the bigger picture. This is the kickoff to ultimately one of the great horror characters of all time.
Yeah, but he's not really.
See, that's debatable.
Well, no, not in the sense that on film and what you see. Yeah, of course, there's little snips here and there, but
Especially in subsequent.
yeah,
First of all, it's called Manhunter, and it's directed by Michael Mann, based on the book The Red Dragon. He fought tooth and nail to keep the title, but the same year, Year of the Dragon had come out about Bruce Lee, and they didn't want any confusion that this was a karate movie. And ultimately, the movie got, I guess, remade as The Red Dragon with Anthony Hopkins. In this iteration, Manhunter, Lecter is played by Brian Cox.
you mentioned based on the 1981 novel Red
Thomas
Dragon,
Harris,
which again eventually would become the 2002 film with Ed Norton, and similar in a lot of ways as far as some of the obviously the main characters, Will Graham, Lecter, and such.
the same basic story,
Same basic
although
story. Yeah.
I think Red Dragon was a little bit truer, although they're both off on the novel. I think Red Dragon was a little bit truer to the novel. And I think the novel had more horror descriptors in it.
Screenplay by Michael Mann, director of photography Dante Spinotti, who, how do you say the editor's name? Is it Dove Henning? I keep thinking of Doug Henning.
Doug
It's
Henning,
an
the magician.
illusion.
Yeah.
Should we run down the kind of key players of the cast?
Yeah, just, quickly.
Yeah. Why, you got to go somewhere?
Well, I don't know if
You got a
people
hot date?
care really. Because
Why
I
are we
think
even
it's
talking? One of the first things you would talk about is who starred in the thing.
yeah.
I'm going to
because-
talk about the cast. So let me run it down.
All right, do it.
William
And I
Peterson.
can add some color.
Yeah, and William Peterson, it isn't like he's not well known. The dude was on CSI, one of the most
Right.
popular series for over a decade, I think.
And originally, they were talking about making the movie Heat, which is also a Michael Mann film, which didn't get made for another decade. He was going to do Heat and give Manhunter to somebody else.
Heat starring a couple of other actors nobody would know, Robert De Niro and Al Pacino. But anyways, so William Peterson plays Will Graham, again from the novel. I think it's Kim Grace.
I always said it Griced, but yeah,
She was
tomato.
a model actress, played a character named Molly Graham, Will's wife.
Mhm.
The wonderful, if for no other reason, to come on the air and talk about Joan Allen.
She's fantastic.
You got no complaints. If you haven't seen The Ice Storm, folks, go look up that film. One of our most popular episodes, by the way, on the O Brother podcast. Joan Allen plays a character named Reba. Brian Cox, again, you mentioned Dr. Lecter with a K. Well, that's Lecter with a K, folks. Dennis Farina, rest in peace. He passed away in like 2015, I want to say, 2014, 2015. Longtime Chicago police officer, detective, a long history.
Got that typical Chicago accent in him.
Yes, and I just could not stop thinking of him in Midnight Run. He was
That's
so
right.
good. so good in Midnight Run.
That's right.
And then Stephen Lang plays Freddie Lowndes, and last but not least, Tom Noonan's, of course, plays the character Dollarhide. Yeah,
This guy was total method on this
very method.
film,
Yeah, yeah,
and he wouldn't in fact, when they traveled to different cities he would not travel with the rest of the cast, he would
right.
not meet with them. Only Joan Allen did he talk to because in the film they have a relationship, so he felt that was okay.
Correct,
He
correct.
stalked the cast. A
You might
couple
wanna
of them.
clean that up a little bit.
Well, no, a couple complained to the to Mann and said, I listened to the commentary, and a couple of complained saying, "Hey, there's this creepy guy that's following me," but he was just trying to research the character to get in the mindset. And
Yeah, they
he
had
is much more significant a character in the book than
mhm.
he is in the movies, either one.
Well, I think he's very significant in the film, personally.
It's a very long novel, and from what I remember, there was a lot of communication between him and William Peterson, which was totally wiped out.
I mean, Noonan sort of said, like you mentioned, just kinda trying to create this atmosphere. He just isolated himself and, Daniel Day-Lewis, other actors like that that have, very
Right,
method. And in this case, I think it made sense to do that, given, the relationship between the characters, the kind of character he was, the kind of guy he was.
right,
He's a very intimidating presence just as a regular guy. He's like 6'7".
right.
Tom Noonan's no small guy, so he just has a physical stature that itself is intimidating to a lot of
And
people.
in the, Red Dragon, that character's played by
Ray
the character.
Fiennes.
Yeah, Ray Fiennes, and Ray Fiennes actually put on 20 pounds of muscle,
Mhm.
and if again, we're talking about Manhunter, but Noonan had the big tattoo that they created, which they used in Red Dragon, but they never shot him without his shirt on, so we never saw it.
No, 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 there's footage of that.
Oh,
There's
is
image
there?
Oh, yeah, there's images of that.
Oh, in
He's
the
got
interview, he
what
said, went through all this
No.
trouble for nothing."
No, what you're talking about is he had this big sort of dragon-like tattoo on his chest,
Right.
but when they were in fact, Dante Spinotti, the, Italian DP on the film, was talking about this. He said, when they were watching the dailies, which at that time was a lot more common than it is now.
Correct.
When they were watching the dailies, Mann just at one point said, That's too much. That's too
Yeah.
much," which I think was a good call. I don't think you needed that, and it was
Yeah, it's
suggest
such a big part of Red Dragon that I thought, they would do
Yeah,
more with it, but I agree, it didn't really
I think it's a little over the
forward the
top.
story or,
Right.
you
I think
know
it distracts from
Yeah.
the character ultimately. Now, Michael Mann sort of and I did enjoy going back and watching this, and in fact, I should say, I definitely did not see this top to bottom. I've never seen this top to bottom
Okay.
up
I
until now. So it was enjoyable to go back and see it, especially Brian Cox's interpretation of the character of Hannibal Lecter,
Right.
which he's on screen very, it's a very small number of minutes that
Well,
he gets on camera.
Silence of the Lambs, Anthony Hopkins had even less screen time, and there's all that controversy because he won his first Academy Award.
Yeah, but far, far more memorable ultimately, right?
I think so, but I really liked Brian Cox in the role, and
Oh, no,
and
he was great. He
I
was great.
wondered why they didn't bring him back.
I think it was scheduling. I think it was a scheduling thing.
One irony that I thought was funny when I was researching was at the time they were filming Manhunter, Anthony Hopkins was not filming, he was on stage playing King Lear, and at the time they were filming Red Dragon, Brian Cox was on the stage as King Lear. I think that's a
Mm,
weird
mhm.
coincidence that's,
I think I recall hearing that, and, it's interesting the amount of research that went into this by pretty much everybody, like,
Yeah, the
certainly
actors.
certainly William Peterson,
Yes.
probably Tom Noonan, I guess, yes, and then actually Joan Allen, like, everybody. I mean, it's not like they go into this and they don't do their homework, but Lecter, Brian Cox, right? This was based on a guy, I think, a guy who was actually from New York, but kind of made his bones in Scotland, and
Yeah,
what
as a
ended up being
serial killer.
was a serial killer,
Yeah.
and he based a lot of the character on that guy.
Mhm.
I actually wrote it down, Peter Manuel. Peter
Okay.
Manuel was the guy's name. But Michael Mann, when I went back and looked at his filmography, I mean, I don't know, it kinda reminded me of Kubrick in a way. He's so meticulous in the research when he'll go to hang out with the police department and whatever it is. He just
Right.
dives so deep, but that ends up taking so much time.
Yes.
Like, he'll do multiple takes and a lot of
Yeah.
similarities I found with him and Kubrick.
And it's interesting because Peterson was doing such a deep dive, 6
Yeah.
weeks of prep. Now, normally you do 6 weeks of prep if you're doing a play
Mhm.
because you open in front of a live audience, but not
Right.
a film. That's
Yeah.
and he told Peterson to calm down.
Yeah. Well, it stuck with him too. I'm sure you heard, like, he talks about when he went on to do he was doing a play, I think, in New York or something,
Mhm.
and
He
he
was a
couldn't
Chicago guy too.
he couldn't shake he was a Chicago guy, right.
Yeah.
Which, again, another thing with Michael Mann using a lot of locals and this and
Yep.
that. No, well, I mean, this was shot mostly in North Carolina, but
Some in
it's
Atlanta.
some in Atlanta, yeah. It stayed with him, Peterson said when he was trying to, prepare for this role back in the theater, he couldn't shake the Will Graham character to the point where he went and got his hair dyed blonde.
Yeah.
So when he looked in the mirror, he would see somebody else and it would help him kind of shake that. And yeah, I can imagine it would stick with you. But let's talk a little bit. I want to kind of talk about, given this is Halloweenfest, I said at the very top, this is not a horror film. Why should people watch this film who are horror fans?
Again, I think it's part of a bigger universe. This is the first step in what becomes really known as the Hannibal Lecter movie, and look at even one of the presidential candidates, I won't say which one, is kind of confused that this is a real life person still alive or whatever. But in the bigger universe, I do think Hannibal Lecter is up there with a Michael Myers or that kind of a character where
Uh,
he's really a horrific human being.
okay.
And it
All
gets
right.
more graphic as the movies go on. In fact, Hannibal, which is the
Yeah.
sequel to Silence of the Lambs, almost was too much for me.
But it doesn't in this film.
No,
This
in
is
this film on its own is absolutely what you said,
right.
psychological thriller.
But I will say this, Mike, is something Brian Cox said in an interview that I came across.
Yeah,
I think it was for like the 20th anniversary.
right.
He says it's horror implied versus horror explained.
That's a great quote.
It's a great quote, and that kind of tells you what you're getting from this, right? And but you mentioned the Michael Myers thing. I can get on board with that from the standpoint that, well, what do we know Michael Myers as other than Michael Myers? The shape.
Right.
It's this suggestion that's made, which you've argued on the show a lot about the power of that when it comes to things like gore, right? We did this episode on Terrifier, the original film, and it's not for the faint of heart.
Right.
And I think you were trying to make the case that, and that's your preference, which is you would rather. I thought of Heat. Speaking of Michael Mann, let's use Heat as an example,
Yeah.
right? You know this because we've talked about this sequence. There's a sequence in the movie Heat where someone's getting killed, shot at gunpoint, close range, right in the head or whatever.
Mhm.
And what Michael Mann does he show us the graphic sequence of that person taking a bullet to the head? No. What does he do? He cuts to an exterior shot of this location, and there's windows,
Mhm.
and their shade is drawn. Soon as the gun goes off, pop, just this flash of light, the sound. That's all you need.
That's exactly my point. I don't have to see it.
Mhm.
In fact, my brain will go places even more horrific than what they'll show sometimes.
Hey everyone, if you love movies, hit that subscribe button and join us for more amazing episodes on the Oh Brother podcast.
Don't miss out.
And don't forget to leave a comment and share with your friends. So for people, for hardcore horror fans that are watching this episode, what are you talking about this for? It's like, this has no place in Halloweenfest. It does, because we're doing all sort of different. In fact, there's other episodes in this year's Halloweenfest that I feel like we covered this big arc,
Yes.
right, of the subgenres within horror, which is, again, I think what you're trying to point out, right?
Right.
That's why I was on board when you recommended it. I wasn't, it doesn't really
Right.
fit,
Right.
right? And even after having seen it, I'm like, no, there's a place for this in this conversation. I feel like, and
I
it's a really good film. But Mike, I know we don't pay much respect to this, but IMDb has a Metascore rating of 75. Okay, that's probably about right,
I think it's
honestly.
about right.
Rotten Tomatoes, which I know we give much less weight here on the show,
Mhm.
critics percentage 94%. The popcorn meter, I think they call it,
Yeah.
77%. So both higher than
Right.
IMDb, but the critic one, which I
That's
think, again,
surprising.
what is it that audiences or people are missing? Because also I want to say, in relationship to that, the budget for this film makes about 15 million bucks, somewhere in there.
Yes.
What did it make at the box office, Mike?
A paltry 8,000,000.
Yowza. So tell me, what?
Back then in '86, the emphasis wasn't on the opening weekend take. And I think if you talk to Michael Mann, over the years, this has certainly made its money back. But in today's world, it would be considered a huge flop.
Huge flop.
But back then, they didn't view, like, we didn't even get the reporting of box office numbers. And again, how many theaters was it in? We don't know any
Right,
of that information.
right, right.
But I had the same reaction to you. I thought the budget was around 11,000,000, or that's what Michael Mann said in the commentary. But when I looked it up to see what it had made, I was expecting a higher number. If you look at
Yeah,
Silence of the Lambs, 272,000,000.
right, right,
Hannibal, the most successful, and I think one of the weakest,
right.
is the highest grossing with 331. Red Dragon down to 219, and then Hannibal Rising 82.
Now, would you say Hannibal is the most violent of the series? If you want to call it a franchise, I guess.
Not having seen Hannibal Rising, I
Mm.
would say Hannibal, yes, and there's one scene in particular
And I
where
wonder
he's a
if that.
cannibal. He's called
Well,
Hannibal the Cannibal.
and look at what you just quote, like the most successful. Like, what does that tell you?
Right.
You know?
And when I looked at the numbers, I was surprised that was, but I think that was based on Silence of the Lambs and the
Mhm.
success of that. They
Yeah.
wanted to see Anthony Hopkins reprise. Unfortunately, Jodie Foster decided not to do it. I think rightfully so, because it wasn't as good
For
as
you're talking about Red Dragon?
yes.
Yeah, yeah.
And
Well,
Hannibal. Well, Hannibal,
Hannibal, right,
it
right.
wasn't her.
The cast in Red Dragon is, pretty impressive when you look at it.
Very.
It's funny. I gotta say, and I know I've mentioned this on the podcast before, but I'm a little partial to Silence of the Lambs, and I think you know why. Because I got a chance to,
Meet the great one.
meet the great one, Sir Anthony Hopkins, who couldn't have been a more gracious guy. It was just a very bizarre meeting, to the point where, like, literally, this was not just some encounter on the street or some sort of
Mhm.
photo op, I had to pay for. This was an organic thing at work. He was filming a movie where I worked, and wasn't even supposed to be on the set that day,
Right. Right.
and ended up taking such a genuine interest in us, in the people that worked there, and what we did, and how we came to work there. And
Yes.
we got photos, and we could put up a shot of, he and I, and it's just such a memorable but disarming kind of guy, that to have played this character.
Right.
And I have that picture is on my desk in my office at the day gig, and nobody ever knows who it is, because he had a beard at the time, this big, full,
Right.
bushy beard, and people think it's like my grandfather or something. But so
In the
I'm a little partial to Silence of the Lambs.
in the commentary, Michael Mann talks about Anthony Hopkins coming to work on his days off to
Mhm.
watch and to meet people. So, I think your encounter I think
Yeah,
there's a lot of
that's
people that might have had that same I don't know
yeah.
now because his fame is so big now,
No, I don't think he's changed at all.
Yeah, probably not.
I don't think he's changed at all. I think if the opportunity presented itself, he's the same. He's
Yeah.
not. I don't know. Michael Mann going, diving into this and kind of seeing his work again. I went back and watched not all but most of Thief, which
Oh, with James Caan.
with James Caan, Jim Belushi was in Thief.
Yes.
This is a movie that was it 1981, I think,
It was
or
before,
it
I
was
know it was
prior
bef
to
yeah.
Manhunter, which, as you mentioned at the start, William Peterson was, going to potentially star in Thief or have a bigger role, probably the Jim Belushi role in Thief. It
Yes.
didn't end up happening, but as you mentioned, that conversation was really also about possibly doing the movie Heat,
Yeah.
which shows you how long Michael Mann had that idea in the can
Right.
because it didn't come out for like a decade later.
And isn't that his most successful film?
I gotta believe that or Last of the Mohicans
Yeah, and
would have to be up there.
if I didn't tell you who directed this, I think you would have guessed.
Well, that's where I was going with this. The chance to, again, watch another Michael Mann film.
Mhm.
He is one of those artists and certainly directors that has a signature style, right?
Mhm.
The music, his use of music in the films, which can really go south very quickly,
Right.
but it doesn't take away in any if anything, it's an additional character in this film with the building of tension
And
and
not necessarily the songs, you're talking about
the
the
score,
soundtrack, yeah, the
the score.
score. He
Exactly.
it it is signature
Yeah,
to
it is.
hear a Michael Mann film.
The color palette, his
That's
use of
the big thing.
right, and also wet streets is a
Yes.
thing with Michael Mann too. Go back and look at any of his films,
Yes.
right? And it's same in this, right? The
Right.
streets are all wet, and there's a great speaking of Jaws, there's a great
Yeah.
dolly zoom shot, which for those that are fans of Jaws, that famous scene of Roy Scheider on the beach,
Mhm.
right? So there's one of those in this by with Michael Mann, which, was subsequent to Jaws, but, just a great he's a great artist. He's a great technician
And along
when it
with you
comes to
mentioned
directing.
Dante Spinotti
Yeah,
as his DP, the 2 of them,
so great.
the colors are so significant. The blue, like when it's romantic, it's blue, green. In Lecter's cell,
Yes.
when they're panning across Lecter's cell, violet is in the sink,
So
and you're like, "Why
so
is
when
it?"
Will Graham revisits Dr. Lecter in prison,
Mhm.
because you come into this like they already know each other, right? That's why
Right,
he's in prison.
in Red Dragon, that's completely explained up front. They worked together
Right,
on
right.
cases. William Peterson alludes to it when he's talking to his son in the grocery store,
Yes, that's right.
because ultimately Lecter tried to kill him and
That's
was
right.
very close to being successful.
This exchange that you were starting to describe with the colors, it's all everything's white, the prison bars are painted white,
Yes.
and the way that Michael Mann shoots this scene, like, you have to understand a little bit about filmmaking to appreciate the way he uses the bars
Mhm.
and frames both Brian Cox and William Peterson in the shot, and yet it's not distracting. You cut to Peterson, you cut to Brian
Totally
Cox,
agree.
and it's so fluid, but it's I don't know, it's just so inspiring, to see that kind of filmmaking.
It is a film that should be studied for its,
Oh,
like
yeah.
you said, for its
Well,
technical aspects.
Dante Spinotti has talked about how, in class, all these classes that he's taught over the years, and, his work, his body of work is incredible, as is Michael Mann's, but all the students, he says, usually wanna know about is Manhunter.
Yeah.
They wanted
Yeah.
to, "How'd you do this? And how did you" and
Right.
so that's another thing. Aesthetically, there are some shots in this film that are just so striking
Mhm.
and gorgeous on film. I wanted to give a shout out to Chris Elliott, who appears in this film too.
You know, every time I watch this, that's
What
always
the f
I remember him on for people who don't know, Chris Elliott is a comedian
Well, let
known
me put
for
it in today's context.
Yeah.
As of this recording, his daughter, Abby Elliott,
Yes.
is starring in The Bear, which is a huge show on.
Okay, I didn't know she was in that.
She's in that, yeah. She
Okay.
plays Jeremy Allen White's sister.
And she was on SNL for a short period of time, but
And I
never
thought she was
really
great. I
caught
thought
up.
she got
Yeah,
screwed over on SNL.
I agree.
Maybe they just couldn't sort of find her place there, but she's very funny. She's
But
very
Chris
funny.
Elliott's fame came from Late Night with David Letterman. He was a
Mhm.
writer, but
Yeah.
he was the guy that would pop up in the stairway, the
I
guy
was
under
just
the stair.
the man under the stairs, yeah.
But I remember him being on Letterman
Mm.
promoting this film,
Oh,
Manhunter,
wow, okay,
and they
I don't
showed the
remember that.
sequence. I thought it was a spoof. I really didn't think it was real.
Well, you would, because he's just such a goof.
Yeah.
What was the name of the sitcom that he had that we used to where he was a paper
He
boy
was a
living with his
paper boy.
parents?
Yeah, like A
A
Day
Day in
in
the
the
Life?
Life or something
Dude,
like
no,
that.
Get a Life. Get
Get
a
a
Life.
life, get
Get
a
a Life.
life. He lived over his parents' garage, and he was a paper boy, 35.
That's right. I wanna talk, about, a couple of quick things. There is, there's a scene in this film with Joan Allen,
Mhm.
and Tom Noonan's character is Dollar Hyde, takes her to, um,
Like a
some
zoological
veterinary
place. Yes.
zoological vet
Yeah.
or something,
Mhm.
and there's this sequence where there's this tiger that's laying on a table of this slab, this steel slab, aneth anesthetized, is that how you say it? That's not
Or e
exactly how you say it.
Yeah, like,
Hold on a second.
euthanized is coming, but it wasn't euthanized. They put it
Correct.
to sleep.
Right.
They didn't kill it.
It's a real tiger,
Yes.
by the way. It is a weird sequence, and Joan Allen, like, she's blind. Her character's blind, we should say,
Right. We
in
didn't
the film.
mention that.
But there's this sequence of her, and he brings her to experience this moment, which you wouldn't normally get unless the thing was put to sleep.
Right.
And she's hugging the thing, and this is
Right.
real kind of powerful scene. She's crying.
In Red Dragon, they have the same scene, and
Yeah.
Joan Allen is played by, oh, from The Boxer, one of our favorite
Emily
actresses. Emily
Watson.
Watson
Yes.
plays the character, but
That's right.
that
Reba.
scene with Joan Allen, if you wanna compare 2 scenes, the Joan Allen is very much
Mhm.
I mean, she's all up with that
D
lion.
do you know the story of that? So the handler, the tiger handler had basically give him the whole sort of safety speech and, "Okay, you're gonna be solid for, like, 45 minutes. No
Right.
issues. If anything goes wrong, just get the hell out. I'll give you the cue and you get the hell out of there." Right?
Right.
Well, Dante Spinotti, again, speaking of him, he says, they're very sort of, aware and being very cautious and this and that. But then as time goes on, they're kind of getting more and more comfortable being in the presence of this tiger.
Mhm.
And I guess at one point, the tiger does this thing with its tail. It just went boop, boop, and they got the hell off that stage because this was in the De Laurentiis studios where they were filming that particular scene,
Yeah,
and they took off like nobody's business. Yeah,
I
it's
would have too.
very, you see the teeth, and
Yep.
it's a weird sequence. It's a very
Dollar
weird
Hyde's
sequence.
reaction to it is kinda sexual.
Well, I'm almost was picturing to be off in the corner, kind of masturbating at one point. It
Yeah,
was so bizarre.
and in this
So
movie,
bizarre.
you kinda have that happen more than once. Like, when
Right,
he's watching a film, he's casing a family that he's
right,
planning on killing,
right,
and he's watching it with her. She doesn't know what it is, she can't see it. He's got the
right.
volume down.
Mhm.
He's just like, "Oh, I have to watch something for work." But
Yeah.
the same reaction.
If I had to compare it, I wonder if you got this impression. He reminded me of Buffalo Bill from Silence of the Lambs.
Yeah, I got yeah, it did pop into my
I
head.
wondered if that actor, took any inspiration from Tom Noonan, because
Right.
it was just as creepy. Put the lotion in the basket. But, it was enjoyable to go back and, see it from start to finish,
Yeah,
and the acting is impeccable in the film. Great
right.
performances by everybody in the film, and Dennis Farina didn't really talk enough about him, but, for a guy that went from serving his time in, the police force
Mhm.
to getting into acting,
Right.
because he was in Thief as well, I believe,
Yes.
prior to this is where
Yes.
he sort of first got cast. He just seems like such a natural on camera. Camera
Right.
loves this guy.
Oh, yeah.
He's just great. He's
And
great
he
in this
gets
film.
away with his Chicago accent because he sounds the same no matter what film it is.
He
He
does.
doesn't do anything where Anthony Hopkins, when he played Lecter,
Yeah.
you know, took it in a different direction than
Mhm.
Brian Cox did.
Yeah.
And the last thing I'll say is the original Lecter, there was several candidates. Brian Dennehy, who was a good friend of Michael Mann,
That's right.
was was begging to play it. Mandy Patinkin, what would
Mhm.
people know him from other than
Homeland.
CSI? Yeah,
Homeland.
Homeland, right.
Mhm.
And John Lithgow, excuse me.
3rd Rock from
So
the Sun, right? Wasn't he in 3rd Rock from the Sun?
yes,
Yeah.
and Harry and the Hendersons, a bunch of movies that nobody's
Right.
seen. But Brian Dennehy says to Michael Mann, "I'm gonna show you how much I like you." He's the one who brought him to watch, Brian Cox do a play and
Mhm.
said,
Yeah.
"That's your Hannibal Lecter."
And for the record, for those wondering, there's literally no animosity at all or any sort of feelings from Brian Cox about not going on to portray this character in the subsequent films.
Right.
He and Tony go back, you know, they're basically from the same, homeland more or less, but,
Yeah.
I think they just respect each other as artists, but I do think it was scheduling.
Yeah.
It would be fascinating to see what Brian Cox would have brought to the role, and what a career he's had too. Good lord, Brian
Right.
Cox. I mean, he is just
Succession, his latest,
and this
you
is a
know
guy who, was pretty much counting his nickels and dimes at this point,
Yeah.
other than working in the theater. But just a great performance. Too short, but very memorable.
Yeah.
Very memorable.
And if
So
you want more gore, look at, over this side, I have
yeah.
all the iterations,
Mhm.
Silence,
Yeah.
Red Dragon, Hannibal being I think, the goriest of them all. Oh, I also have the Hannibal TV show right here.
Oh, that's
I
wild.
didn't know I owned it.
That's funny. Yeah. But to be a completist, you gotta go back and see this film Manhunter if you haven't seen it.
I think so, and it's like I said up front, it's the orientation of
Mhm.
a character that becomes, I think, a staple in horror.
You talked about Tom Noonan. He and Will Peterson had never met
Interacted, yeah, that was their
until
first meeting.
the very end of the film, and it's a great sequence. But there's a sequence where this one cop gets shot by
Mhm.
Dollarhide, and it's very intense, and he blows the guy's head off,
Yes.
literally, and they
Yeah.
show it.
Yes.
So it's graphic in a few spots, but again, this is a psychological thriller. This is not a blood and guts horror film. It's not splatter horror like
Right.
Terrifier. But if you're trying to diversify your horror portfolio, this is one you got to put on your list if you haven't seen it already. If you have,
Yeah.
back to the video, drop some comments here. Let us know what you think.
Yeah, and the one last comment, there's actually a character in all 4 movies.
Yeah.
And in this one, in the subsequent movies, he plays this character, Barney. It's a guy that brings Hannibal Lecter his, meals or whatever. He
Yeah.
works.
Yeah.
But in Manhunter, and I did not know this until this watch, he plays a cop. They're trying to William Peterson's reading him names. They're trying to figure out the identity of Dollarhide.
Mm.
And it's the cop that says, "Is this him? Is this him?" Well, he becomes Barney for the next 3 movies.
He's a well-known character actor.
Right, you'll see him, you'll say, "I know that guy from something."
Absolutely, and you're right. They're at the precinct, and
They're at the
they're
precinct going through.
communicating back and forth, looking at the whatever that was, the fax machine is how
Right.
old this thing is, right? This pre-internet, pre-cell phones, and all that
Yeah,
sort of
I
stuff.
just find it interesting that he's in every single iteration,
That is interesting.
and it's a character that I remembered from Silence, and I remember him in Hannibal. He was going to Hannibal to
Mhm.
sell, things, like or not to Hannibal, he was going to somebody else, a victim of Hannibal's,
Okay.
selling him, like, his mask and, things
Yeah.
Hannibal touched and things like that.
Yeah.
But
Well, listen, Manhunter, there you go. There's a dive into Manhunter. Let us know what you love about the film. But great cast, great directing, like just all around.
yeah.
It's a really enjoyable film. So
And as much as I like it, I think the IMDb score is pretty fair. There's a couple of sequences
yeah,
that are pretty unbelievable.
I might even bump it up to an 80 if I'm,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? To be
Yeah,
honest,
I
but
would say that's about the same place
yeah,
I land.
it's one worth having in your collection, I would say.
Yeah, I have the collector's set. Unfortunately, it didn't come with a digital or you would own it.
Well, that's going to do it for another Halloweenfest episode of the Your Brother Podcast. I'm your host, Dan Smith. Alongside me, as always, my brother from the same mother, Mike Smith, and we will see you next time.
Bye, everyone.